One of the subjects I really didn't like in primary school was history. I thought it was an irrelevant subject, but the older I get, the more I realize my hate for the subject stemmed more from the teachers than the actual curriculum. One teacher in particular comes to mind, Mr. Bolton. Mr. Bolton looked so old, I remember thinking he was teaching the Anglo-Boer War from first-hand experience. Mr. Bolton was so incredibly boring that the only thing that kept me awake during his classes was my worry that at any given time he would collapse from a worn out hip bone or something. But the older I get, the deeper my appreciation grows for the important lesson history can teach us. It's just so unfortunate that sometimes the gift of education is challenging to receive because the packaging it is presented in is not the most ideal. If you spend a long enough time with me, one thing will become very apparent. I absolutely love food. Few things make me as happy as indulging in decadent explosions of textured flavor in my mouth. There are very few things that crush my spirits than being excited the whole day to eat a delicacy I'd saved for myself only to open the fridge and find out someone has already eaten it. As painful as that experience is, it seems I never learned my lesson because to this day, I still save delicious foods for later in the fridge. This illustrates the other challenge of learning, where the paradox of hedonism makes us so engrossed in pleasure or the absence of pain that we use it to determine the morality of potential course of actions. It's important for startup entrepreneurship to think about both the pains and pleasures of their decisions, in whatever form they're wrapped in. For if we are thinking about profits and how these can be maximized without paying close attention to losses and developing the muscle to tolerate this pain, we run the real risk of losing badly. In 2015, Ehan Kose and Marco Torones published a book titled Collapse and Revival: Understanding Global Recessions and Recoveries. In the book, the authors present a study of global recessions and recoveries, looking at the annual data for 163 countries from about 1960 to 2012. The authors take a deep dive into national business cycles and the interesting linkages between financial crises, recessions, and recoveries. Kose and Torones give a detailed analysis of the 4 global recessions our world economy has experienced in 1975, 1982, 1991, and 2009. What's interesting to note are the patterns that emerge and the cause and effects of recessions and recoveries. In these catastrophic times, everybody loses. However, some lose badly and never make it to recovery. The challenge with these big iconic companies that fail is that they were once great winners. The mistake that many startup entrepreneurs make is thinking that being a great winner makes you immune from becoming a catastrophic loser. One thing I'm glad I got to learn from my experience of growing up in a South African township is dancing. Don't let these nerdy ramblings with a polished accent fool you. In the right context, with adult beverages and good music, I can bust some serious moves and rep the streets that raised me hard. The thing with dancing is you have to strike a delicate balance of paying attention to the music while having the rhythm to express your enjoyment of the song through synchronized movements of your body. This is the extended metaphor that makes startup entrepreneurship so challenging. It's a delicate balance of finding your rhythm between being on the offense and being defensive. Extremes are devastatingly deadly. As driven innovators with an eye for opportunity, it's natural for us to lean on the side of always being on the offense. Naturally, it's the wins that get publicized and get movies made about them. So we're more inclined to focus on becoming better winners. Winning is what we are taught, and we use it as a springboard to launch our ventures. Losing doesn't come naturally. I recently read an interesting article on the Harvard Business Review titled Roaring Out of Recession. The article shared some interesting findings from a study of 4,700 public companies and how They performed 3 years before recession, 3 years after recession, and during the recession itself. Only 9% of the companies flourished after the economic slowdown. 80% of the companies had not yet regained their pre-recession growth rates for sales and profits 3 years after the recession. And 17% of the companies did not survive the recession. My intuition of the companies that flourished was that they were aggressive in investing for growth. I thought the majority of the companies that survived but slowed down drastically post-recession were overly defensive and implemented a lot of cost-cutting measures. The outcomes of the study really surprised me. Most of the companies cut costs and went very defensive as expected. However, the companies that flourished during the post-recession constantly listened to the changing tempos of the music in their markets. These companies danced the fine balance of strategically selecting which growth avenues made the most sense to invest in while only making defensive cost cuts that lead to overall efficiency. In other words, being a great loser should be as much of a focus as being a great winner is. This series has been about shining a very important light on the essential ingredient losses are to the entrepreneurship process. I'm deeply passionate about this space and feel there is so much we can learn when we get out the way of our own selves. To do this, however, may require confronting the experiences in our upbringing and environments that shape how we think and view the world. The entrepreneurs I have met and interact with regularly are highly competitive individuals with an insatiable desire to win. This is not a bad thing. In fact, very few entrepreneurs build anything without this instinct. However, what the research shows is that what sets up businesses for scale and highly leverageable brands is the likelihood to survive losses. Entrepreneurship is a function of being brave enough to try despite a real likelihood of failure, and then continuing to try after experiencing failure. If you are driven towards the idea of startup entrepreneurship, but are uncomfortable with losing often, and on most occasions losing publicly, then I sincerely hope my words have inspired you to do some deep introspective work around how you can overcome this. Our past and history is a big part of who we are. Even the uncomfortable parts we'd rather hide and not talk about shape our attitudes and behaviors. Being a better loser requires being vulnerable to yourself about yourself and not letting wins or a lack thereof define you or hold you back from the gift of learning. One of the most transformative books I've been introduced to is a book called Educated by Tara Westover. Apart from being one of the most beautifully written books I've ever read, its honest truths about the effects our upbringing have on our view of the world is astounding. I won't ruin the book for you, but what I can tell you from reading this masterpiece and from my own life experience is most of the profound educational experiences come from losses. I'm a big advocate for losing because I'm a big advocate for learning. Before I go check if my snack is still in the fridge where I left it, I want to thank you for watching this and hopefully the other 4 videos in the series. You see, between about 1815 to about 1840, it was a period of widespread chaos and warfare among indigenous ethnic communities in southern Africa known as Mfecane, or as old Mr. Bolton would say, the Mfecane. 200 years later, and there is still widespread chaos in many areas, and political and socio-economic battles. And as much as there has been significant strides and exponential change and development, there is still some significant losses we incur because of our refusal to learn some difficult lessons from history's classrooms. I'm no prophet of doom, but I wouldn't rule out financial crises, national business cycle downswings, and much more drastic global economic recessions. However, this is why I'm more excited than ever to be an entrepreneur. For every loss I take on and navigate gives me the strength, insight, and prowess to take on future losses. So here's to becoming better losers. Let's dance.